So these are my thoughts on the Jessica Krug story, which emerged last month. So first of all, I don't know her, so I don't have much to say about her as a person, her moral character, what she's done, what she's currently doing when it comes to her personal journey. She did introduce herself to the world. I did not have that opportunity. Unfortunately, I was introduced to the world through a very negative and oppositional lens from my biological parents, and have been, constantly reacting and responding to that introduction. But she did introduce herself in an essay, and anything other than her words are going to be a secondary source. So keeping all that in mind, it's been annoying and even somewhat insulting, quite honestly, that people have compared and even conflated our two journeys together. I think that people are so quick to oversimplify and to miss out on a lot of just the nuance of different life journeys and experiences. Even huge glaring differences don't seem obvious to some people. So I've received multiple interview requests for television shows, as well as print sources, and I've considered just remaining silent on the issue, because it's a comparison that I don't think is serving anyone any particular higher purpose right now. And there are some very obvious differences, again, that I can see very clearly just based on the primary source of her own words. So I feel like, there's a perception that I have a responsibility to respond, to have some kind of comment or some kind of, stake in the situation. And so, I wanted to add some nuance to the discussion, because it's once again been just very hype driven, very sensationalized, and also has kind of led to a lot of assumptions about even mental illness and people who experience childhood trauma, kind of lumping a lot of things together that don't necessarily always coexist or aren't always the case. And so I don't so much want to talk about her, or even talk about me for the 100th time. I do, however, want to just address the topic and offer some basic thoughts on the subject of crossing so-called racial lines, identifying in a way that doesn't match the way that you were seen at birth or the way that you are seen by others or visualized in the world within the paradigm of the race worldview. Or, even people who are just living in any way, whether spiritually, physically, mentally, or otherwise, in between groups. Like you're, not black enough, you're not white enough, you're not this enough, you're not that enough, and you're getting ping-ponged around, and you're constantly having your group membership questioned or revoked or, argued, and you have to continuously explain and justify and defend your position in the world. So I wanted to just kind of make some comments about people who find themselves in those spaces, and hopefully these ideas that I'm going to put out there are helpful to someone. So the first thing in that regard is, you're not wrong for how you feel. You're not wrong for chasing after what feeds your soul. And you are not wrong for any kind of cultural expression that authentically represents who you are, whether mind, body, or soul. Once again, we are a triad. We are not just a body. We're also a mind and a spirit or a soul. And so authentically chasing after what really drives you, what really, makes you tick, what brings joy to you and motivates and inspires you is not wrong. It's not right or wrong necessarily. It's just, who you are. So the second thought that I'd like to offer up is what we've been doing with allowing gender fluidity and yes, once again, just to clarify, race and gender are not the same thing. Culture and gender, ethnicity and gender, race, ethnicity, and culture aren't even all the same thing. So when we come into these terms just with an understanding and an acknowledgement that these are not the same thing, but for the purpose of being helpful in understanding and kind of grasping a new concept, what we've done with allowing gender fluidity has not made sexism worse. It has actually moved the needle toward greater gender equality, toward more acceptance and inclusion for male and female, for people who are non-gender binary, transgender, or any other sort of a gender terminology that expresses how an individual feels about the gender issue, how they experience themselves when it comes to gender. We have learned to respect that. We have learned to allow new terminology and vocabulary in that space and with that category. And so I just, once again, similarly to the fact that allowing gender fluidity has not made sexism worse, in the same sense or a similar sense, allowing cultural fluidity is not going to make racism worse. And in fact, it's going to actually move the needle toward greater inclusion and equality, equity, and even a greater just understanding of how people, once again, just experience themselves on the basis of blackness or whiteness or mixedness or poly, ambi, omni, racial, or even non-racial, or just human, or however people want to describe themselves. And so I think that, we need to honor those terms that do express fluidity, even if this is a somewhat of a new concept or less socially accepted and socially sanctioned right now. We have to remember that there was a time not too long ago that gender fluidity was not accepted, and even sexual orientation fluidity or variance was not accepted and was considered a mental illness and was, deemed curable, and all these kind of things, which we would now think of as being, the ideas themselves actually being kind of crazy that you could judge a person so harshly to judge their felt and lived experience as being a mental illness. So when it comes to, again, just the idea of fluidity in culture and in, a chosen stance of defying the race worldview or someone defecting from their birth culture, I think we need to be a lot less judgmental and a lot more understanding, especially in our current globalized world. We have a lot of opportunity to listen and to understand. And I think we need to remember always that race is a social construct, that the human race does not meet the zoological requirements for separate races. And therefore, the idea of race essentialism, which the majority population, it seems, or maybe it's just the media, it seems to, be operating on that basis of race essentialism, which is to say that race is coded in your DNA. And actually what's coded in your DNA is your humanness. There is no DNA thing for race. Yes, there are continental ancestry groups, but eventually we all have ancestry in the continent of the same continent, actually, the continent of Africa. And so we are technically all members of the Black human race, and nobody can really deny that truth or that identity, even if a person does connect with maybe more ancient roots or more distant ancestry. However, I think that, just acknowledging that race is a social construct is not to say that racism is a social construct, because racism is very real behavior that is based on and built off of the foundation of the idea of white supremacy. And the idea of white supremacy is what birthed the idea that race is coded in your DNA. So if you're a race essentialist, if you believe that race is coded in somebody's DNA, that it's a biological fact that you're born with and is not, in any way fluid, then really you're perpetuating white supremacy in a sense, because that's the view, that's the worldview that created that idea of separate races. So yes, we can challenge the race worldview and challenge racism at the same time. And actually doing those two things are both challenging white supremacy. So just wanted to put that thought out there as well. So in the same way that we do not have to support gender binaryism to fight for equal pay for women, we don't have to support just a two-gender system to do that, and we don't have to dismiss transgender identities or realities to support equal pay and promotion for women in the workplace. In the same way, it's a false narrative that there has to be a winner or a loser in terms of supporting an anti-racist agenda and supporting a revolution against the race worldview. So we can support everyone who is in favor of human rights. And it's interesting that even the NAACP, kind of reiterated what Martin Luther King said as far as content and character are more important than the color of one's skin or the melanin level. I'm melanin deficient, yet I am pro-Black, and that does not have to be an irony. It does not have to sound strange. So Martin Luther King, said, the content of someone's character over the color of the skin is really the determining factor in being able to judge a person's legacy and judge their value in society. And I think that the NAACP really echoed that in 2015 when they said that, we stand by Rachel and her advocacy record, and, her racial identity is not was never a qualifying factor for her leadership, and it's not a disqualifying criteria for removing her from leadership. And so the national president stood by that statement, and it still is on a Google search if you don't believe me that the NAACP supported me in 2015, because the media sure didn't cover that. But it is, they're on NAACP statement on Rachel Dolezal. But to the point, not so much about them supporting me, but just in terms of racial identity is not something that marks a moral, flaw or a character trait. It's just a personal realization and a personal truth. And so how you identify is your personal business. It's really nobody's business to get in there and try and police that. So right now I feel like in the world it boils down to two groups. It's not, black and white or even Democrat versus Republican. I know I'll probably get a little shade for saying that, but really it's like right versus wrong. Like, what's your character? Who's for human rights? Who is for oppression and, doesn't care about human rights? Who is for protecting the planet, which does then protect human rights? Who, could care less about long-term protection of the climate and human beings and human life, and is looking more after, their wallet, or business. So really, I think it's a matter of like, what is your character? What is the content of your spirit and your mind? And, what is the legacy of your life work? So in that sense, like, how are you and your loved ones doing? Who has benefited from your work? Are you more of a giver or more of a taker? And, do you judge and condemn, or do you seek to listen and understand and empathize? So I think that, those are the real kind of, binary things that do exist in the world in terms of, right and wrong. And there is some objectivity in morality and in character. And yes, with both Krug and I, we've both been called liars. Well, she called herself a liar, I should say, because she basically said, that she was pretending this whole time. This is not really who she is. And I've been called a liar, but I've never apologized for who I am, because it is not a lie. It's because it's, the same person I've always been. I've always been becoming me, and I'm still me. So it's not something I can apologize for, because I can't just be somebody else or be somebody I'm not. And so I think that's the big fundamental difference, is that I'm living my truth. And she said in her own words that she was living a lie, and that she kind of, had to close that book and move toward her truth. And that, the gig was up, that she was kind of canceling herself. So, is Rachel and Jessica, are Rachel and Jessica the same? Is Krug and Dolezal, the same thing? No. Not any more than any other two women in America are the same woman. I think that, there's so many differences. So, and once again, I don't know her personally, but just again, based on her own words in her essay, she said she made up a whole backstory, and made up an identity to escape who she really is. And even though some people didn't know that, who my birth parents were, or that my father figure, Albert Wilkerson, was, my dad in every real sense, but wasn't my biological father. Some people didn't know some of those details, but everybody knew I was from Montana, from the mountainside. There wasn't like a whole backstory that was made up. There was not a fictitious narrative that was entirely concocted out of the blue about, almost like a cartoon character, or a person that didn't exist. The whole time I was trying to communicate to people my realness and my authenticity, while navigating these racial binary, race essentialist constructs that many people have, somehow trying to negotiate my real authentic identity amidst a landscape of, with a lot of landmines in that landscape, of this race worldview. So anyway, I guess, I was never really, I never tried to escape who I am, is what I'm saying. And Jessica Krug said she was escaping her story and herself, and so she's kind of moving back to that real story. I've consistently always been who I am. I was the same in May of 2015 as I was in June of 2015, and at the insistence seemingly of the entire world that I apologize for being who I am, I have not apologized. Although I felt terrible about some of the conflict that has been created in the very heated and ugly argument and debate that has ensued about race, because it's poked at the hornet's nest of racism, and it's also poked at the pain of a lot of people who have historically been oppressed, and has created a lot of tension and controversy. And I think most of that controversy has less to do with me as a person. I don't actually like conflict. I like to give. I'm generous. I like to help and assist, and not to cause problems, but hopefully in some larger picture, this was a little bit of good trouble, in John Lewis's words, to, just kind of challenge that race worldview, to challenge white supremacy, to challenge the notion that white is right, to challenge the notion that white is normal, to challenge the notion that race is biological. There are separate races within the human race that are biologically real and have different value and different IQ and different behavioral traits, and all of these things that are built into and coded into racism itself. So hopefully, my legacy will be more of one that strikes a blow at white supremacy, but I think that depends a little bit on what people do with the dialogue. And back to the Jessica Krug situation, to sum it up, I guess I'm just saying that pretending and faking is different, very different, actually opposite from expressing and connecting, from being your real self. And I would recommend, if you're curious about other stories of non-traditional or non-Western or patriarchal types of realness. Redefining Realness is a great book by Janet Mock. Also, my book In Full Color is another autobiography, and even Asada by Asada Shakur, and Becoming by Michelle Obama. All of these are stories of women who have fought this battle with society saying you cannot do this, you cannot be yourself, you cannot celebrate yourself, you cannot become yourself, the best shade of you, the best version of you, the best evolved spiritual self, and the best healthy body of you, and everything. Like, all of these voices saying you cannot and you should not, or we don't want you to step outside of this box that we've created for you. And that box has always been oppressive. So with the race worldview. So I would also just say that mental illness is very different from an authentic realization of a personal truth and personal empowerment, and realization of the self, even if it's non-traditional, should not be deemed crazy. And not too long ago, again, the LGBT community, and transgender as well as sexual orientation, gay and lesbian and bisexuality has all been deemed historically as mental illness, and now we see that was like a fallacy, that should have never been deemed a mental illness, and we accept that now. So I hope that people can kind of just accept that fluidity when it comes to culture is real. Racism, unfortunately, is real, and is definitely real because people believe in that race worldview and enact that race worldview. But to challenge that core foundation of white supremacy is to fight against racism, and is an anti-racist act. So, another thing that people have told me, there's just been a lot of, like I said, everything's secondary, a secondary source other than the person's own words. So as in my situation, when people say, well, I've done my research on you, but I haven't read your book, then I think, well, you didn't really do your research, because anything but my book on that's online or that you can find is somebody else's view. It's somebody else's opinion. It has usually every article or TV show or even the documentary or anything is, it's not my content, and therefore it has a third-party lens and an agenda to it. So somebody else who wants to say something about me, but it's not really me just relaying my firsthand personal story. So that's my book. And in a similar sense, everything about Jessica Krug, other than her essay and her own words, is going to be secondary. But people have told me, like, okay, I see the big the big difference between the two of you is that she doesn't have black children, so she doesn't get, what it's like to be scared for her son, and police brutality and all these different things, and the education disproportionalities and disparities, and that your kids are going to deal with on a daily basis in school, and all of these things. She doesn't have family members that are black. She doesn't have this history or track record of doing things for the black community. I don't know her. Again, I don't know anything about whether she's a parent or not. And I don't know what she has or hasn't done for the community. All I know is just that she dropped the essay, and then I started getting contacted by everybody. So, I do know that it sounds like she had a much higher paying and more stable job than I've ever had at a university, which, it seems like she's a decent writer, and her essay, even though it was kind of an act of self-destruction in a sense, I kind of thought that there was a lot of academic jargon in her essay that seemed non-unique, that seemed copied and pasted, that, a lot of sound bites like anti-black violence. She said she was enacting anti-black violence by her identity structure, or by faking, pretending this identity for these years. And, you know, she was canceling herself because Black philosophy led her to that point where she had to cancel herself and her career. So if those things are true and kind of taken literally, then a big difference between the two of us would be if she's anti-Black, you know, I'm pro-Black, so that would be a difference. If she feels like Black philosophy led her to cancel herself and to kind of retreat from academia, I feel like Black philosophy empowered me toward self-determination, toward being a strong, self-determined woman who knows that at the end of the day, I know who I am, and I don't afford anybody else the right to tell me who I am, because that is oppressive, repressive, suppressive, and it ultimately will make the person depressed, you know? So all of those energies, oppression, suppression, depression, repression, are things that I have fought, that I've healed from my childhood past. And you know, again, Black philosophy has taught me that, like, we're more than a body. The physical is part, but there's also the spiritual, there's also the mental and emotional. And so in a sense, you know, like, sometimes the spirit and the mind can be more powerful in shaping a person's identity. And you know, when you connect with really the you of you, that internal deepest part of your being, then I feel like and not like basing things on other people's opinions or whether something's going to be accepted or rejected on social media. You know, when you go to that deepest level of knowing you, then you really learn like the shape of your soul. And at that point, you can't go back. You know, there is no like, oh, this isn't really me, so I'm going to just, you know, give up this act. It's not an act, you know, it's a constant and gradual becoming, a constant and gradual awareness level that expands. And once you get there, then it's like, you know, that's a point of no return, because you know yourself. And that to me is the most freeing and empowering state of mind and spiritual experience. And so I wish that for everyone, whether the deepest part of yourself, you know, matches your body, whether you look like the mission or you don't look like the mission, whether, you know, your body, you know, is ironically mismatched from how you feel. You know, you are enough. You are correct in how you feel. That's real. It's no less real. So it's not like you're being somebody you're not. You know, it's just kind of coming into a more harmonized sense of being you. So those are my thoughts, and I hope that this brings a little clarity to those who have been constantly asking me to say something. And for everybody who doesn't really care one way or the other, then go check out some of my cooking videos or hair tutorials or other things on my YouTube channel. And you know, just stay strong, stay healthy, and always, always, always stay true to yourself. So I'll catch you later on the next video.